coming up on the panel today, we'll be talking about A Silent Voice, a quietly affecting coming-of-age drama, 5 centimeters per second, a poetic tale of heartbreak, and of course, Violet Evergarden, the movie send-off to the eponymous hero. Of course, before we head into the discussion, we have to give you a big spoiler alert, obviously, as we'll probably be discussing scenes candidly and that happen throughout the entirety of the film. So it's time. Let's jump in with, first off, how are you both doing?
Yeah. Very well, thanks.
Yeah, good.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm glad you're both doing well. I was hoping that each of you could also tell us a little bit about your experience with emotional responses to anime. Do you cry at everything, or is there something specific that stands out to you as a significant moment in your time as an audience member?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not in the cry at everything stage, and we'll probably kind of get into that even talking about some of these films, but when something gets me, it really gets me. I actually, in my past life, writing about anime, I did write an entire article about kind of anime that makes people cry way back in the day. And it tends to be, I'm a sucker for like romance stories that have like sad elements to them, like when there's some kind of unrequited love and a character gets turned down or realizes that there's no hope for it. That's always the one that really gets me going. So yeah, I have been known to break down in tears at more than a few anime over the years.
And Kat, what about you?
Because you notice it's quite significant in KyoAni stuff, and just in general, it's always the long sort of drawn out parts in like sad anime and romance anime, where it's just like the silence that's always the most heartbreaking part. So every time I've cried, it's usually the will they won't they part, or if it's just like the moments after something dramatic happens and you're just sitting there like, this is the worst thing ever. you know.
Yeah, I have quite a different experience to both of you guys in that retrospect, because when I think crying in anime, I just think of Grave of the Fireflies and how I thought I would never feel happiness again, which I think is what a lot of people associate as well with anime that makes them cry. But first up, we have A Silent Voice to talk about. So let's start off with a very brief synopsis, in case there's anyone here who hasn't seen it. Shoya starts bullying the new girl in class, Shoko, because she's deaf. But as the teasing continues, the rest of the class begin to turn on Shoya for his lack of compassion. When they finally leave school, Shoko and Shoya do not speak to each other again until an older, wiser Shoya, tormented by his past behavior, decides he must see Shoko once more. So the film focuses on the two characters of Shoya and Shoko. How would you both describe them in your own words?
Yeah, I mean, Shoya in particular is kind of a really interesting protagonist for an anime because, anime characters always go through some kind of arc, but it's very rarely one of kind of starting from a point of almost being the villain and going through a kind of a complete redemption in the way that the Shoya does. And so he's kind of a really fascinating individual to be a protagonist. And it's quite a brave move because it's hard to like somebody when you see them at their worst right from the get-go. But Silent Voice does a really good job of kind of selling you in on that idea that, hey, this character, yeah, he's been a bully and he's clearly has his flaws, but also there is another side to him that you get to see throughout that film. And Shoko equally is really interesting because, while she is kind of, she starts out as being sort of the subject of this bullying, etc., you kind of get to see her warts and all throughout that film as well. Like, she has her own sort of issues, her own sort of hang-ups, her own ways of kind of manipulating people at times and in places. And I think that's one of the things that really makes The Silent Voice stand out, is it's not just kind of cardboard cutout characters or cliches or tropes. Like, they feel like actual living, breathing people who are, not all good, not all bad. They are kind of complex characters, and I think that's what makes both of their stories so really kind of fascinating to watch.
Yeah, I think I agree with Andy, and I always think it's just like they're two broken people that well, they didn't find each other. He has his flaws, and I like that he's trying to find his redemption, almost like justifying the fact he's trying to do good and trying to help her and that, and it's from the start she's like resistant, but also because she was bullied by him, the sort of friction is there. It's great because obviously, like, it's just two people stumbling through the dark to try and like work around each other, almost like forcibly. They're just in a situation, and like it's you kind of get that feeling through the film of, you know, do they want to actually hang out with each other or what? And then he's just bumbling.
Yeah, I think I agree with both of you on that point as well. I think that because you see the good and the bad in each of these characters, you know, including their worst moments, you get a full range of emotion that makes the characters more human and ground them in reality. Since you also mentioned how the story is resolved and the end of it, I wanted to ask you guys how you feel about through the story, Shoko explicitly saying, I love you to Shoya, but Shoya never reciprocating that, even though obviously it is somewhat implied there's a romanticism, or do you like that it ends kind of, you know, not explicitly said and just perhaps knowing that these two have just helped each other grow and it may not necessarily be a romantic connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually like really one of the strong things that this film does, because I think it would almost be the lazy option to be a very explicit, you know, then they fell in love and were lived happily ever after. Because, you know, even at the end of this film, or even though they've sort of overcome some pretty kind of major sort of obstacles and issues in their lives, it feels like, you know, it's very much only sort of the start of the story for both of them. Like, they're both still young, they both still have a lot to learn about themselves and about other people, and I feel like it feels stronger given that it's sort of, you know, it's a resolution to some of those issues, but there's still a lot kind of left unsaid, and I think it works it works really well as kind of leaving it open-ended like that. You know, sometimes series and films can be frustrating when they try to leave something open to, you know, viewer interpretation or whatever it is. But I think in this case, it's actually kind of, it's almost part of the point that kind of actually the romantic love between them, whatever that might be or whether that exists or not, is actually not really the important thing. And it's almost more about the personal journeys than the two of them being together or not.
Another really important aspect of the film is the music and the sound design. It's very unique because the film opens with My Generation, which I feel like gave me a false sense of security that this was going to be a happy film, and it most definitely was not. But the remainder of the film has a very abstract soundtrack. You know, like when you look at the scene on the train when they're on the way to see Sahara and they don't say anything to each other, there's just this beautiful score playing in the background. How do you guys both feel about the music in the film and how it adds to the emotional narrative?
I come to this from sort of a weird place of A, being kind of a big nerd for kind of film and TV instrumental soundtracks, and also a big kind of nerd for sort of like abstract electronic music. And so this is like very much in my wheelhouse of just like, this is a really great soundtrack. Like, it's sort of, it's an unusual thing to kind of sit and listen to kind of standalone, but it actually, like for me anyway, it really works as kind of just like a good soundtrack. But yeah, I think it adds kind of an interesting sort of sense of place, I guess, to the film. Like, it's sort of, it's hard to put a finger on exactly what the kind of the emotional resonance of it is, but it definitely has one, and it definitely kind of like hooks into the core kind of emotional feel of the film and its characters, and sort of represents it in a really kind of quite a unique way. And again, like the composer of the soundtrack has worked again with Naoki Yamada on the currently airing Heikei Monogatari, which again does some very similar things in terms of being music that, if somebody pitched it to you that this is the music that we're going to use for this film, you'd probably raise an eyebrow and be like, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want like big orchestral things and, you know, violins and all of that stuff? And like your default would be to push away from this sort of like musical style, but it actually works so well as a kind of, as a background to this. And it does, for me, it does the perfect thing that any good soundtrack should do, in that it is there to kind of accentuate the big emotional moments and to kind of drive on that emotion, but it's also there to take a backseat and be more subtle and just kind of quietly underpins some of the less kind of big moments as well. Like, and that's the core of a good soundtrack to me, is it knows when to be a part of the big picture and when just to be kind of like swelling underneath, so that you really don't even notice it, but it's just kind of there, just like adding a little bit extra essence to whatever's going on.
Yeah, that moment when Shoya, like at the end, is able to actually look people in the eye, and he's able to just perceive the environment without being so anxious and nervous about it, and the entire soundtrack just explodes at once. And, you know, the huge sort of triumphant swells and the orchestral style, like, just, it's just beautiful. And it just again, it just nails home how emotionally impactful that moment is. And I remember I was just crying so much because I felt happy for him. I had to use that final track that was used in the film because there was nothing else that would sit well. Like, and I would happily, if I could, you know, cut another one where it's just a much more quieter, nuanced, like, piano tracks, because the whole film is just, it's in its complete state. It's just beautiful, and the music just absolutely is the ribbon that ties it all together.
It's funny that you mentioned the trailer, actually, because the song that you used, I did find very haunting. Like, sometimes when I'm in the shower, just like thinking about my life, that song will play in the back of my head. So it was a great choice. And the last question, which will be the last one to each of these films, is what is the moment that made you cry? And you can't cheat by saying the whole thing. There has to be a specific moment.
You see, this is where I'm going to break the entire panel and say Silent Voice didn't really make me cry per se.
What?
And I think I know. Sorry, like I'll just leave now. And the reason for that is not that, like, oh, it's not really an emotional film, or like, you know, I'm too manly to cry about this. I think it's because it has such a emotional impact throughout its runtime. Like, usually films that are emotional, they have these kind of really high kind of crescendos that they deliberately reach for, as just like, right, this is the moment where we're gonna hit you. Like, sometimes they can, to the point of feeling manipulative, of just like, right, this is the bit where you might as well flash up on screen, cry here. And I think the thing is A Silent Voice doesn't do that, because it has you constantly at this kind of emotional peak right from the get-go, and so that sounds like it's very much almost a backhanded compliment of just like, yeah, I didn't cry at this, but that's because I was just like moved by the entire thing from first minute to last. And if I were to start crying at the start of this, then I would be asleep, exhausted by halfway through, because I don't think I have that much kind of like that many tears in me.
And Kat, what about you? Is there a specific moment that made you cry? I know. I asked him
just
not to cheat.
Said the whole film. Like, what? Oh man, I'm trying to think. I think the parts that they're just inherently sad. Like, obviously the part when like Shoko was to jump. That just, everything about it. And then obviously you didn't know if he was going to survive, and it was almost like, is he going to die in her place? Like, what's going on, you know? And it was just stressful, and I was just like broken at that point when I was watching it. And I guess, yeah, for me that bit made me cry so much, because they just they subverted that whole happiness and just completely like just kind of like shotgunned you with like this sudden moment of, oh, she's decided she's not actually happy, and you know, you saw the signs, and now she's gonna kill herself. And it really hit hard. That, and like it was that contrast of the beauty of the fireworks in the background and the muffled noises, you know, like the and everything, and it was just this beautiful but not sadness. They just framed it so well, but in a way you don't want to say that because it's such a serious topic. And yeah, it's just, yeah, that's the part that hit home for me, where I was just like a mess.
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself that the big moments in the film also made me cry a lot. But it's also in the very tiny moments, like shots of when he's bullying her and he pulls out her hearing aid and it draws blood. I think for me anyway, there's something so visceral about anime blood that just really shocked me and just instantly made me cry, because he's hurting her so badly and it's not even drawing blood that he's like, oh, I should stop now. He feels like he's almost on a train where he just has to keep riding it until the very end, and it's so hard to watch. Next up is 5 centimeters per second. Takaki and Akari become best friends after transferring into the same elementary school. However, the two are separated following their graduation. As they place their feelings for each other behind them, time simply passes by. This is a journey into 3 interconnected tales of love and lost innocence that span the minutes and months of their lives. So I don't know about you guys, but whenever I think of Shinkai, I think of longing. How do you guys, how do you think this film falls into his filmography? Would you consider this one of his best movies?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, this is definitely kind of one of the high points. It's a film that is probably the film I've rewatched the most times out of everything Shinkai, because I do have a real love for it. It's kind of, it's a really good, if you want to explain sort of what Shinkai does in a single film, this is probably the one to show it, because you know, it's kind of, it's an hour long. It's not you know, a vastly long film, but it kind of distills the core of what he's going for just very succinctly and very well. Like I know people don't like the lack of a proper ending to the film, that it leaves hanging, which like he clearly decided to fix, and almost refers to in Your Name in the end as a kind of like, look, I did it this time, please leave me alone. No, this for me is kind of the quintessential Shinkai.
Yeah, like it was the first Shinkai film for me as well, and I remember I watched it. When did I watch it? I think I was in university when I watched it, and I was just like crying the whole time, and I was like all this sort of awkwardness and the unrequited like feelings and everything, and you know all the times you've had crush on someone and it's unrequited. And I was just like, oh, this is so sad. I'm enjoying it. It was always like just enjoying the sadness of it so much. And yeah, as Andy says, it's if you want to see what Shinkai is all about, 5 centimeters is immediately your sort of gateway drug to all his stuff. Yeah.
So for our next question, long distance relationships have their problems, but they seem increasingly common in the modern world due to, you know, everyone meeting over the internet these days. How do you guys personally think long distance affects a relationship and adds to the emotional content of the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually that's one of the reasons 5 centimeters, and particularly like the first segment of it, really sticks with me, because I mean, around the time that I watched 5 centimeters, I was in a long distance relationship, and so the kind of the long, and by long distance I mean in another country, like we're not even talking kind of like across, you know, it wasn't just a train journey, but I think it really, it kind of captures all of the joys and the difficulties of that, kind of culminating in that long kind of much delayed train journey, and kind of the stresses of trying to kind of meet up with somebody who you love, but they're you know so far away, and you know every little thing, every little hold up that kind of reduces your time with them or makes it harder to meet with them just feels like this massive kind of weight on your shoulders. And every little train delay or flight delay, or you know every little thing kind of gets like exploded 1,000 times over in your head, because you're like, this is time that you know I can't lose and I can't waste. But no, I think it's a really good film, like in terms of, you know, trying to maintain a relationship with that distance and the issues that has in terms of communication, which again is a big Shinkai thing, and trust. And you know, there's something a bit sort of quaint about looking at 5 centimeters now, when we live in sort of an era of sort of, you know, emails and Zoom. You know, we're spoilers for like the production of this panel, but we're not all in the same room, but like we're all talking in real time, and kind of
what?
I know, shocking. But you know, there's something kind of quite quaint now looking back at 5 centimeters per second, where, you know, the distance between the two main characters, it feels like a real massive barrier in terms of the two of them communicating. I'm kind of curious as to how, you know, probably even sort of, you know, the current sort of generation of teenagers who are maybe having long distance relationships would view something like 5 centimeters per second, because it's like, you know, it's just not like that anymore if you are have any kind of distance in a relationship.
Yeah, there's a lot of romanticism around pining for one another in a long distance relationship. And like Andy said, I've also been in a long distance thing where the film is very good at capturing how everything is heightened. Like, you worry about everything. And obviously, you're so much more aware of the time you have with this person, but it makes everything more intense. And it still festers the longing even when you're with them, because you're so aware that, oh, there's going to be a point where we have to separate, even though we're together right now. It's very intense. All of these films are very, very intense. But as we briefly touched on as well, one of the main themes of the film is communication. And I wanted to ask you guys, do you think that external means such as, you know, letter writing, spoiler for Violet Evergarden, or mobile phones give people a chance to express their true feelings by, you know, liberating them from away from direct confrontation? Or does it actually make communication more difficult because of the lack of body language?
Little of column A, little of column B. I mean, I've always been somebody that's far better at conveying what I mean in written words than in spoken words. So sorry that you're having to watch this on video and not read an essay from me. It depends on the person. I think some people are very verbal and very visual and very, you know, find kind of body language very important. For some people, it is a lot easier just to communicate with written words, where you have a bit more time to sit and think about what you really want to say and what that means. And so that can sometimes be a real benefit, where you can actually really put across exactly what you want to mean without stumbling, without saying something in a way that can be misinterpreted. It's a lot easier to be clear and concise and poetic, to be honest, when you're writing, especially in a relationship. You know, I was a big fan of writing love letters when I was in that long distance relationship, even though, you know, it was an era of email as well, but there's something about getting a written letter from somebody, a handwritten letter. But that does also kind of feed into the negative side of that lack of visual and face-to-face communication, in that you can kind of, and it's something that still sort of happens, I guess, you know, with online stuff in general, where you can always present that idealized version of yourself. Like, you can kind of sanitize things in a way that you can't when you're having like an everyday conversation or occupying the same physical space as somebody. And so I think there's always that tendency that people will naturally have, that they'll want to put their best selves forward and kind of like hide the sides of themselves that they're maybe not as comfortable with or confident with, or they just, you know, they kind of know that, hey, I don't really want other people to see this. And I think that's kind of the flip side of having that lack of kind of visual face-to-face communication, is it's a lot easier to hide your flaws on both sides and perhaps present a version of yourself that's not entirely real.
Yeah, like letter writing, oh, spoiler for Violet Evergarden, but obviously she's hired to convey how they feel into letters, and it's almost a fabrication of that person. I mean, it is the whole point of that series, is to truly express their feelings in that, but you're still going through someone to do that. And obviously in 5 centimeters, the like I said before, the distance creates that fabrication of like the idealized version of this person, the idea of the person. And I think it's a sort of 50-50 on it being like, you know, being in the same room, because I'm a person that I'd rather be sort of seeing someone face to face to know what they're saying, because sometimes I'll read stuff so out of context. But then I also like conveying myself through text, because I find you can take the time to curate what you're going to say. But then again, you can also instantly say something, and it's just, you know, it just shows your true personality. So really, but nowadays it's such a hot mess. Communication's a hot mess, and I guess given the, you know, the pandemic and things, and we've all had to do stuff online, it's become harder for us in that connection as people to be in the same room and to be able to remember that person and understand how they were. Because when you meet up with someone, you're like, is this how I remember them? And it is still them, but there was obviously certain like everyday behaviors that you've not witnessed in a while.
So let's talk about it, guys. What are the moments in this that made you cry?
So for me, and I'm really shocked we haven't like talked about this more. The middle part of this film is the bit for me, and as I mentioned right up at the top of this, unrequited love is the one thing that always just like gets me right in the heart. And it's just like an arrow through the heart, and the middle segment of this is just all. It kind of starts off in quite a nice place, like, you know, you kind of get to see the characters, you get to see where Takeki's at, you get to see Kanai, and kind of like, oh, you know, she's cool, like, she's a really nice girl, she, you know, has her own passions and ambitions, and this is all really interesting. And then you kind of get to see the two relating, and you can just see the despair kind of building up. The more time you see the two of them spend with each other, you can see kind of Takeki's like disinterest. You know, he's literally staring off into the middle distance on a hill at times, thinking about Akari, and Kanai is there just like, I'm right here, I'm literally right in front of you, but you're looking like over me, beyond me, at somebody else. And that is just so sad, seeing like how invested she is in him and how much she cares about him, and you know, kind of wants to share everything with him, and he doesn't, it's not that he's not interested, he doesn't even see it. Like, he doesn't even realize that it's right there in front of him and that there's somebody who really cares about him. And that whole build up, and as that goes on, is just kind of heartbreaking to me. And then the ending kind of like, you know, I think that ending segment just kind of carries through on that, in terms of just seeing like Takeki's place and how, you know, he's still hung up on, you know, something that happened so long ago at that point. And that's kind of like, it's a different kind of sadness. It's not quite a kind of like making me cry so much, but there's a real sort of sadness to that, of just like, this, it feels like such a sort of wasted potential and time for this character because he's still hung up on the past.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I cried the most in that second one, man, because like, I cried for her when there was the frustration, like that part when they're walking home and she's so frustrated. She's just like, you know, she wants him to see her, and then literally a rocket goes off. And then they both watch that moment, and I think that's the point where she realizes that like she's just minuscule, like she's just a ghost basically. It's just that frustration building up, and to the point where it reaches that climax, and she never tells him, and it's so frustrating that you can't help but cry, because it's just people, everyone's probably been there, you know, they wanted to tell him how you feel and you literally just couldn't, because you know it isn't worth the risk. What is he gonna say? Like he just doesn't, it's not that he doesn't care, he just, like Andy says, it's just doesn't see her, that she cares about him. That got me.
When I was crying about this film, I actually found that I was crying because of frustration rather than like actual sadness. Like when he's on the train to go and see her and it keeps getting delayed, like at every single stop, I was just like, no, he's gonna miss her. And yeah, like you guys were saying, in the middle part of the story, just being like, oh, you should tell him, but also you completely understand why she can't and doesn't. So just a lot of frustration all around. And finally, let's talk about Violet Evergarden, guys, the one that everyone's been waiting for. So after working as an auto memory doll, Violet Evergarden has come to learn the meaning of the words I love you. Her soul, which has been deeply scarred by the war, has finally begun to heal. So there is a lot of focus surrounding the phrase, I love you, throughout the series. She doesn't understand when Gilbert conveys that to her, which ironically, something similar happens in A Silent Voice too. However, in the movie, I love you has become the foundation for Violet's development. Do you think that Violet now understands her own emotions better, and how does she express them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, that's one of the interesting things about this film, is that it is so reliant upon kind of everything that has come before. It really kind of, you know, if you look back through the TV series and then to this film, like you can see the building blocks, you know, being built up, the foundations being built throughout that series. And so this film is incredibly emotional, but also very satisfying for kind of seeing, it really is the end of Violet's journey in that very kind of like, that very dyed in the wool way of like, what does I love you mean? What is this? Because this is kind of when this film starts, she's sort of at the point where she fundamentally understands it, but there's still just that gap there, and this film is all about kind of closing that gap and then getting closure. And I think it does a really good job of putting that across, and kind of like letting her reach that complete understanding, not just of what that phrase means, but what it means for her specifically and what it means for her relationships with others. And that's kind of I think that's what makes this film so powerful, is it's just that final gap between knowing what I love you means and knowing like how it feels. Almost like this is the point where, you know, the Violet Evergarden you see at the beginning of this series is like, you know, emotionless. She is kind of a doll herself in a lot of ways, and her ability to kind of, you know, to learn what those emotions mean through kind of, you know, the people she encounters is really powerful throughout that series. But this film is really where she gets to learn it for herself, based on kind of her own experiences. And yeah, like it's everything about that is incredibly powerful and incredibly effective.
She just learns about every aspect of love throughout the series. And in a way, I feel like throughout the whole series, she absorbs that and she interprets it in her own way. And in the final film, it just feels like, okay, this is the grand finale of love kind of thing. And I'm just like happy that she finally, it's like she's fully formed by the end, and it's almost like, okay, so now here we go, here's your long lost love. Like he's now, and he still thinks that he doesn't deserve her because he brings her misery. And it's like, no, that's not the version of her that you remember, like long ago when you were basically almost dead kind of thing. Like she's I feel that she's grown far beyond him, and now it's like her turn to sort of be the person to bring love to him and to nurture him and everything. And she obviously, spoilers, she does that the final the letter she writes to him and everything. And I think it's just such a beautiful conclusion to the series.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention Gilbert as well, because there's quite a lot of varying opinions of him. Can you please tell us what your personal opinions are of him? There will be no judgments here.
Yeah, I mean, I think Gilbert is kind of, he's kind of been a bit of a jerk in terms of how he's played things here, you know, because the entire sort of fundamental, you know, plot of Violet Evergarden is that, well, look, you know, he's disappeared, like he's missing, presumed dead, and like it seems like it's inevitable that he's died, and that, you know, that is the cause for a lot of kind of grief on Violet's part. And the fact that it turns out that he was, you know, alive all along and was kind of wallowing in his own sort of self-pity rather than actually confronting that. And it's kind of like back to what Kat said about sort of the tables are turned almost, where, you know, at the start of the series, Violet is the one that is emotionally repressed and having to like find out her feelings and figure things out. By the time this film comes around, like she's got it all figured out, and it's actually Gilbert who has kind of repressed his own feelings and emotions, and kind of made excuses for himself to not face those. And, you know, even when he's given that opportunity by Violet, like, you know, he pushes that away and he tries to push away from it, out of, you know, a sense of kind of like, this is what he deserves. And in a way that there's kind of like, you know, almost that does ring through sort of back into like a Silent Voice territory, where, you know, characters feel like they deserve a certain outcome because of the things that they've done, and they're not really necessarily willing to listen to other dissenting voices to say, well, look, that's great and all, but, you know, what about my feelings in this? And it hits some very similar notes there in terms of kind of an almost selfish kind of decision to be a martyr or whatever it is to somebody else's feelings, without actually considering what their feelings might be and how those feelings might have changed over time.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, it is self-pity exile that he kind of gives himself, really, to be on that island and everything. And like, I'm a sucker for that sort of anime character where it's like the good-looking guy, but he's pretty messed up. Like, I'm just a sucker for that kind of like trope. And like, so seeing him being like a broken mess, it was just like, oh, this is so good but so sad at the same time. And like, I think that's what just makes the last like 30 minutes of that film just so excruciatingly painful to watch, because there's so much struggle, and it's not even frustration. I think. I mean, you do feel frustrated for Violet when she finally gets to see him, but you feel more just angry at Gilbert for just being like, what are you doing, man? Like, she's literally giving you her love. Like, she's and then that's when it, like, the letter, and then he's running, and then she jumps in the water even though, like, her arm won't work in the water, and that whole part when they're moving towards, and, like, KyoAni know what they're doing. They obviously do, and it's just the most drawn out reunion I've ever. The whole film is just the longest reunion like I've ever witnessed in any sort of like anime film or film in general.
Yeah, and I think kind of probably the more generous reading of Gilbert's character actually sort of ties into one of the other core themes that doesn't really get talked about so much with Violet Evergarden, and that is that this is a world that has come out of a war, and all of the characters that you meet throughout this series have been affected by that in different ways, whether it's direct or indirect. And Gilbert is just another victim of that. Like, I think there is kind of like a sort of an anti-war sentiment really that runs throughout the film of just like, you know, you tend to look at wars from the big picture, the kind of, you know, top-down view of how many lives were lost, like, you know, what was the economic cost, all of this kind of stuff. And Violet Evergarden takes it doesn't really care about, it doesn't even really talk about who won or lost the war, because that's not really important. What it cares about is what it's done to the individual lives of the people who were caught up in it. And almost every story within that series is, you know, in some way tied to that, and you know, some more so than others, but it has a lot to say about the kind of, you know, the unique circumstances of individuals who have been, you know, either physically or kind of mentally injured by the conflict, or they've simply been kind of torn apart from people that they care about, or you know, a combination of those. And I think, you know, if you look at kind of Gilbert's behavior from the point of a sort of, you know, post-traumatic stress from, you know, a horrifying conflict where, you know, he's lost his own sort of mobility in a lot of ways, and he's also lost people close to him. It probably makes a lot more sense in that context that, you know, so much has been damaged to both himself and those around him that it's quite natural for him to want to push away from that and seek kind of isolation and refuge from everything that's happened to him.
Yeah, you both also picked up a lot of the build-up of the original series, and you know, there may be some people out there who are discovering the world of Violet Evergarden just through this movie, but do you think that people can expect it to work in a way that they can also connect with emotionally, you know, regardless of whether they've seen the series or not?
I think there's probably a core to it that you can gravitate to and sort of enjoy, but I really do think you have to watch the series to fully appreciate that journey. It's like I was kind of talking about with the series builds up the foundations of Violet's character and her progression, and I think, you know, you can probably enjoy looking at the finished building, but it's not going to stand up properly without those foundations in place. And, you know, this film very specifically, like, even, I mean, it's kind of how it got me, like, the waterworks going from the get-go, because it references the most emotional episode of the TV series as part of its kind of setup of kind of like, you know, a young girl who is frustrated because her mother is taking all of her time, like, with Violet, writing all these letters and not spending time with her child, and it turns out that it's because she's terminally ill and the mother is going to die, and she wants her child to have an annual letter from her to basically talk her through the rest of her life. And it's this incredibly emotional sort of climax to that episode, and that actually loops right into this film as the starting point of this entire movie to kind of talk about, you know, how that young girl has kind of grown up, and, you know, her own sort of experiences off of the back of that. And so it kind of sets the tone right from the get-go to be like, look, this is going to be a one hell of an emotional journey. And it continues to kind of hammer you with that, you know, you have another story of kind of terminal illness, which is just like absolutely heartbreaking from kind of minute one to, you know, when that kind of portion of the film ends, and then you have the whole emotional climax. So there are universal things that you could take out of this if you went into this film blind, but I think A, you should watch Violet Evergarden because it's a fantastic series, but B, it really gives you a lot of grounding in terms of who Violet is and why everything that she is doing is so important to her.
And last but not least, then, I mean, this will be particularly tough for this film in particular. What are the moments that made you cry?
Yeah, I mean, it's not really difficult because the answer is all of it.
Can't say that, Andy.
I mean,
I think we might all say all of it for this one. Though, so.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like I only cried for about half of the running time, but that was only because I'd literally run out of tears at that point.
Just sheer exhaustion.
I was just a husk. I was just, desiccated by that point in time. But no, and I mean that is the thing. It's kind of it's an interesting juxtaposition against the silent voice that it didn't make me cry at all, but that had a heightened emotional state for me throughout. Whereas this kind of it hits all of those kind of spots that I think in the hands of another studio and another director would feel manipulative, and it's just kind of it's just sort of emotion porn in a sense of just we're going to hit all of the things that are really going to make you cry. But it does it with. It's so genuine about it, and it does it with enough nuance and subtlety that it never feels like it's kind of it's never deliberately trying to make you cry. It's just saying hey, look, this is how it is. This is how these things are transpiring, and of course you're going to have an emotional reaction to it. But that it is what it is. I can't think of any other film that I've ever watched that has absolutely destroyed me in terms of just having to cry the entire time like this. It is such a kind of it's a 2-hour film, and the entirety of it not a moment is wasted in kind of being tear-jerking in some shape or form.
It felt longer than that, sorry. It felt way longer than that. Oh my god.
Yeah, and it's and it does it in so many different ways, because there is kind of the kind of sorrow about kind of the loss of it's a film about loss as much as it is a film about love, and it handles both of those things. The fact that it manages to handle those two kind of very different emotional but sort of still kind of tear-jerking responses sometimes at the same time is kind of quite something. But yeah, I would have cried more if I'd have had more tears to shed, but that was pretty much the only thing that stopped me, I think.
Yeah, it's just that scene when she jumps off the boat. It's the final scene. She jumps off the boat, and I mentioned it earlier, and they're just literally, she's just if I recall, she just literally just sort of swims towards him, and it's so drawn out. This is again why the film, not in a bad way, feels really long, because KyoAni has that way of just drawing everything out in the way that's just excruciating. And if Violet and Gilbert had not got together in that film, I know I said oh, it's great that in 5 centimeters he doesn't find that happiness, but the whole series is just from the offset, it was been about her and him, and the end game was them getting together. And if they hadn't delivered on that, I think it was just, can imagine riots, because it's just everything's been pointing at that. And if they suddenly did a bait and switch and it turns out they don't get together, or he did reject her, honestly, it would have completely ruined me forever. I'd never be able to watch another sort of a sad anime film ever again. So for that payoff, it was just so satisfying to see them reunited, and it was and she's crying, and it's oh, the crying, because they're crying, you're crying, obviously, and it's just everything about it was just so beautiful. And I just, at that point, I was just pretty much on the floor of the cinema, curled over, this is it, I can never cry anymore again. I was just absolutely eyes swollen out to here, absolutely destroyed, and it just it delivered. And I think that's what made that scene so rewarding. It was the most gratifying sad experience of my life.
And I think it's one of the things that actually gives it, Violet crying in particular, so much power is, again, you go back through the TV series where you see this sort of emotionless character that is, even when confronted with, perhaps what seems like the death of Gilbert and stuff, she doesn't really have a natural reaction to it. And so as you move through that series and you see her showing emotion and see her reaching things that make her cry, that just gets you going in a kind of feedback loop, because it's well, if Violet, who is struggling to find these emotions, if it's enough to move her to tears, well then damned if I'm not going to be able to not cry as well.
The crying in that final part as well is just, it's pure relief. just finally they're kind of like he's almost just like a husk at this point, and she's this whole person, and she can finally care for him and sort of give back to him the love that she's experienced and seen through all the series. Finally get him to know what love means, you know?
Just like resisting the urge to also break out into "I want to know what love is" when you just said that about 2 seconds ago.
I've been trying so hard to not say it. I've been trying
we
so
thought
hard
it
not to
might
say
come
it.
up at some point, but I think that's actually about all we have time for. So I would like to say a big thank you to Andy Hanley, to Kat Hall, and to you guys watching. Bye, guys.